So Drake's new album, For All the Dogs, has been out for a few weeks now, and I think after listening to every track over and over again, I finally have my opinion fully formed. So as per tradition, I'll be ranking every track on the album from worst to best. As always, keep in mind that this list is just my opinion, and you are allowed to disagree. Also, I'm not going to be ranking the DJ Screw interlude, since I think it's way too out of place to compare to these other Drake songs. But let's just get into it, starting with... Pretty easy pick for last place here. Boring beat, monotone robot singing, and some classic Drake corn in the lyrics, with him talking about how love is like a BBL because you can't tell if it's real until you feel one. And before anyone says something, yes, I know Drake is purposely being kinda tongue-in-cheek here, but does that make it any less cringy? Not really. I live like Sopranos, Italianos, Now as for my least favorite song that isn't an interlude, we have Gently. And I honestly expected better for a Drake and Bad Bunny collab since I do really like their song Mia. But my god, the fake Spanish voice Drake does on here is absolutely dreadful, especially when he pulled it off so much better on their previous collab. Bad Bunny's verse is also nothing special, and the song at 2 minutes just feels super unfinished. I was in a club before she even had it. She was 21. Here we have our first Drake and 21 Savage collab since Her Loss released last year, and it is extremely underwhelming. First of all, Drake's falsetto singing combined with the lyrics like this is pretty terrible. Then you've got that 2-minute long skit in the middle of the track that does nothing but make me want to skip it, and then 21 Savage drops a pretty average verse. Just a really forgettable track overall, especially considering we already have a whole album of Drake and 21 songs that are better than this one. Bipolar, baby, seems like it just... Drake's outro tracks have sort of built up a reputation of being major highlights on his albums, but unfortunately, Polar Opposites does not carry on the tradition in the slightest. The lyrics are alright, I guess, but at this point in the album, I am just too sick of Drake's robot voice crooning over minimal production to really even care. We'll get to it later, but I honestly think the track before this one would make for a much better closer. But with how it is, the song is a painfully disappointing ending to the record. You're too down with the gang, you're one of my men. Truthfully, the only thing that makes this track stand out to me are more of the awful Drake lyrics, like the chorus with him repeating the word gangy, and of course the outro filled with these stomach churners. Also, a real quick tangent about Party Next Door's feature. Just compare his verse here to his features on some of Kanye's tracks. Like, the guy is such a good vocalist when he actually has a reason to try, but for most of his output, including this feature, he's just painfully mediocre. But despite all of this, we do get a spiritual successor to the infamous lesbian line on CLB, so that's something, I guess. Broken pinky promises, you fucked up our Bahamas trip. This has gotta be the most Drake a Drake song has been in recent memory, with him name-dropping some girl named Haley and saying she ruined his trip to the Bahamas. It reminds me of that one time he complained in a song that he couldn't land in the Hamptons because his private jet was too big. But other than the kind of funny concept, the track is kind of a snooze fest. The instrumental's alright though. Moving like Snoopy and Charlie Brown, feel like you trying to dog the kid. Man, it really takes ranking every individual track on Drake's albums to fully realize how many lifeless R&B cuts he bloats his track lists with. Granted, we are officially at the point in the list where I do like the tracks, but my point still stands. Really, it's the instrumental and occasional catchy refrain from Drake that gives this track any memorability. And I guess the fact that there are no downright awful lyrics on here is technically another positive. Oh wait. Never mind. I counted up money for fun. You know, popping you purchase for fun. Now here we have a classic Drake moment where he makes a song in the style of a new popular artist with said new popular artist so it doesn't come off as stealing. And with this particular track, it's Yeat. Now, I'm not really a huge Yeat fan, so I knew this track was never going to be one of my favorites, but there are some positives. I really like how abrupt the transition from the sample to Yeat's first verse is, and Drake actually has some energy on his verse, so that can't be praised enough. But the biggest positive about the song is just the fact that it gave us the money for fun meme. Another damning piece of evidence to add to the Drake Zesty conspiracy bulletin board. It's just another late night with my bitch. And just like with I Don't Give a Fuck, this is just a little Yachty track that Drake's on. Now, given Yachty's pretty impressive run of singles, as well as his work on the back end of a bunch of recent Drake tracks, I was honestly expecting a lot better from these two. Drake's verse is pretty alright, besides this awful bar he drops about Millie Bobby Brown, as if he wasn't absolutely the weirdo in that whole situation, but Yachty really underdelivers in my opinion, leading to just an alright song overall. No, you don't do perks, baby, but take your time. That's the perks that they meet. Man, shout out to Tizo Touchdown for getting not only a feature on Utopia, and 2 features on For All the Dogs, but also being the best part of all 3 songs. Absolutely massive year for him. Now as for this track specifically, like I said, Tizo's chorus is my favorite part, but Drake's single verse is definitely passable, and the gospel-infused instrumental is a great change of pace for the rest of the album.
chasing, got my name glow in the dark. Lit up the dark like I'm over your mark.
So I really like the first minute of this track with Drake's faster flow over the punchy drums and reversed synths, and Chief Keef's chorus is unbelievably catchy, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't get a little disappointed after all of the momentum of the track was completely halted after the beat switch. And it's not even like I hate the second half of the track, it just feels like the beat switch is just there for the sake of it, you know? There's actually been a lot of Drake tracks as of late with this issue, but All the Parties is probably the most blatant case.
Treated you like you're one of mine.
Now, Tried Our Best is a very interesting track to rank, since I feel like I really shouldn't like it as much as I do. It's another slow R&B cut with Drake crooning about some random girl, but I think what really makes this one work for me is the singing. I don't know, for whatever reason, Drake's vocals feel a lot more emotive here, and the chorus is super smooth with the Ty Dolla $ign background vocals. Really just goes to show that Drake can make some pretty decent R&B if he just puts in a little more effort.
What Pluto do we for the hoe, so I did it. What Pluto do we for the hoe?
Okay, first thing to get out of the way. No Future is not on the song, and yes, that did disappoint me on my first listen, but nitpick aside, What Would Pluto Do is a pretty fun track. I think the main highlight for me, honestly, is Drake's performance. Like, you can just tell by the energy he brings that he had fun recording the track. And the Yachty production and background vocals really boost the energy well. Also, real quick tangent about Yachty before we move on. I just gotta say, I am insanely impressed with his reinvention as an artist and public figure. It's crazy to think that only a few years ago he was being compared with the likes of Lil Pump, and now he has an Album of the Year contender under his belt, a crazy run of singles, and is now basically Drake's creative director. Impressive stuff.
Holy gang, patty gang, rich baby daddy gang.
I've actually been seeing a lot of people hating on this track specifically, and saying that Sexy Red ruins it, and honestly, I couldn't disagree more. Her chorus is so infectious, and her flow fits perfectly over the really fast drums. SZA also has a stellar verse as usual, and even Drake's first verse is pretty smooth. Honestly, this track would probably be top 5 for me if it wasn't for another goddamn beat switch that brings the track's energy to a complete halt. Seriously, why are there so many beat switches on this record, and why do half of them suck?
Remember, I was in the cold when those froze, I was sleeping in the whip trying to get...
So you remember when I was talking about polar opposites and I said the track before it would function as a much better closer? Well, this is that track, and yeah, I don't know why he didn't make this one the outro. Not only because it's just a lot more interesting sound-wise, but the lyrics are actually consistently pretty great, telling essentially Drake's origin story. It's nothing insane, but he's been at the top of the rap game for so long at this point that it's now just inherently more interesting for him to write from a perspective where he was still hungry for fame and success, as opposed to constantly winning and making money. I don't love the hook, truthfully, but other than that, it's a pretty solid track.
I don't like what you did on them trips.
7969 Santa to me is just a more fleshed out version of Time Flies off of Dark Lane demo tapes, which is good for me since I already like that song quite a lot. The ambient synth patches create a pretty nice atmosphere, and Drake doesn't really have to do much to fit the vibe. Also, the Chief Keef sample that pops in every once in a while is fire, I don't care what anybody says. But despite the pretty good first half, like I alluded to earlier, Tizo comes through and carries with the singing performance during the outro. Honestly, I want to hear a proper R&B song from him and Drake, because both of them can be incredible vocalists when paired with the right instrumental.
Let's go pound for pound, I'm a year. Grown hard collie, I had it imported.
So as we near the end of the list, you'll start to notice that I usually prefer Drake's hard-hitting bangers over his slower tracks, and Fear of Heights is no exception. The beginning of the track kind of reminds me of Major Distribution, in the way that it starts with a slower beginning before abruptly transitioning into a much more explosive second part. Now as for the beginning, it does have some bad lines, and it is a little long, but I think it's absolutely made up for after the beat switch. And it's not even like what Drake does here is all that different for him, but when he's actually forced by heavier production to get his energy up, his delivery and flows are excellent. So despite being pretty standard Drake affair at this point, the track is still one of my favorites.
Treat all my answers like Jehovah's Witnesses, free all the dogs and fuck all the witnesses. They sit in...
Now Daylight to me is honestly just a slightly better version of Fear of Heights. The two really have the exact same structure. But Daylight does have a few aspects that make it the better track in my opinion. Firstly, instead of Drake singing for a minute during the slower intro, we instead get a roughly 30-second sample from Scarface, which is a lot cooler. Also, barring any theories about XXXTentacion in the lyrics, overall I think Drake's bars here are more of a highlight. I especially love this little section of lines here. I mean, I can't say any of them, obviously, but they're still hard. And of course you have Drake's son Adonis coming through with an admittedly pretty entertaining outro.
Sliming you out, sliming you out.
So believe it or not, I actually rated Slime You Out a 5 out of 10 when I first heard it. And I'd just like to formally apologize for taking such an L with that score because this song's really good. I don't know what the hell got into Drake here when he was recording his vocals, but he sings so much better on here than any other track on the album, to the point where it almost sounds like a different guy during some lines. And then you've got SZA coming in after Drake sets her up with these lines, and she just absolutely kills it with her verse. And even Drake's last verse has grown on me a ton. Like the bars where he starts each line with a month is insanely smooth, and even when he goes into a more rambly delivery, it just works with the soulful R&B backing. I think it was Yachty who said that For All the Dogs was going to have a lot more old Drake sounding tracks, but to me, this is one of the only tracks that ended up fulfilling that promise. Now, opposed to Drake outros, Drake intros are pretty much always heat, and I think Virginia Beach is another fantastic track to add to the collection. The Frank Ocean sample worked into the instrumental is incredible, Drake's hook might be the catchiest part of the entire record, and despite the track not being as lyrically complex as some other Drake intro tracks, he still rides the beat in such a satisfying way. You know, I feel like there's been more and more criticism towards Drake for his lack of defining sound, and while it is true that he does explore a lot of different genres of music, in my opinion, it's tracks like this that perfectly blend most of Drake's signature sounds and end up becoming the future classics. It's funny, I legitimately think that every person I've seen review this record so far has the exact same top 2 as mine. And I mean, it makes sense, this track is really just the music cheat code. Like, of course a Drake and jcole collaboration was gonna go crazy. Obviously, Cole is the real highlight here, with some excellent bars referencing the big three made up of himself, Drake, and Kendrick, as well as beginning his verse with some really sharp criticism of the people who dissect lyrics in a way purposely trying to find some ulterior meaning when there usually is none. And of course there's some hard one-liners thrown in as well. And thankfully, Drake matched Cole's verse with a pretty impressive second verse of his own. My favorite part's gotta be when he just starts listing the names of random women in his context, and then this line about the Grammys and the MJ line are both pretty insane flexes. But despite the quality of the track, there is still one left that I find to be better. And that is, of course,
The money speaking for itself, I call it fortune tell.
I mean, what's there to say really? This is one of the best rap tracks to come out this year, and might honestly be my new favorite Drake timestamp song. So yeah, I definitely think it's the best track on For All the Dogs. First of all, you've got Conductor Williams, aka one of the top producers for Griselda on the beat, and he supplied a simple but near flawless backing for Drake here. And speaking of Drake, he drops 3 of the best verses on the whole album by a pretty significant margin. Seriously, there are so many good bars in here that it'd really take too long to go through each one of my favorites. Pause here if you're curious to see all of them. But even beyond the one-liners and double entendres stacked throughout the verses, Drake is just so good at making you as the listener feel like you're living his opulent lifestyle when he tries on songs like this, which in my opinion is what separates him as one of the best to do it, at least of the last few years. I can clown Drake as much as I want for all the bad tracks he has, and he does have a lot of them, but there's a certain point where you just gotta respect the guy's pen game. So yeah, as you probably gathered, I think 8 AM in Charlotte is phenomenal, and definitely my favorite track on For All the Dogs. And there we go. That's every track on Drake's album For All the Dogs ranked from worst to best, in my opinion. And just for fun, here's all the tracks scored next to each other with the album's overall score below. If you enjoyed, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and comment below your ranking of every track on the record. And of course make sure to check out my previous videos ranking every track on other albums with the playlist linked in the description. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.